Hey guys, this is a random thoughts video where I talk about something non-review related. And today I want to talk a bit about paint applications while still showing off a masterful repaint done by Jay Carriere from the Dinosaur Dungeon. We're familiar with the shortfall in paint applications from prototype image to in-hand model. For low-priced models like the Safaris and Collectaes, we don't really care, as there aren't even release images of masterfully painted prototypes, so there's no fall-off to talk about. With higher-end models, where releases are often announced with prototype images and excellent paintwork, we're more concerned with how far off the actual paintwork will be, especially for expensive pre-order items, which is a big risk. Now, lower-priced models can still disappoint us if the shortfall is quite far off, such as the PNSO Unlimited Edition Spinosaurus. Generally though, it's the more expensive models that give us the most expectations. However, we still accept there will be some shortfall. Even the sideshow statues had them. For example, this is the official product image for the sideshow Dinosaur Triceratops. Now look at the beautiful paintwork by Steve Riojas. In particular, note the paint application here in the back, the flank, and the frill. Now, looking at the actual model, and you'll see an obvious loss of complexity. Overall, however, it still looks pretty good, and that's been my general experience. Now, for those of you who watched my iToys Carnotaurus video, let me say that difference was so egregious and more like the difference between an original item and a bootleg that I would call it an outlier. The first I've experienced in 20 plus years of collecting. In general, you should never experience anything like that with a reputable, established company. Now back to the regular program. The reason for this difference mainly relates to cost. Prototypes are painted by master painters who focus attention on one piece, giving it the best possible presentation and introduction to a new model. So you'll see many layers of subtlety that, were they reproduced on mass-release figures, would make them way more expensive. There are, however, a couple of other scenarios you might not be aware of. The first I'll mention briefly, which I forgot to talk about in my review on the GR Toys Carcharodontosaurus Flame version. Now in this case, the actual in-hand model was quite different from the prototype images, but not in an inferior way, just different. You can see that in the prototype image, the flame version actually has a more naturalistic color scheme. And I think it would have delighted many who love the sculpt but want something more realistic. And here you do get something very well painted, but perhaps more fantastic than you bargained for. The second is a case where you get less than you bargained for, and that is a fall-off not from the prototype to the mass-produced model, but a drop-off in quality even among the mass-produced models. Now this actually is a rather common situation, with earlier runs of a mass-produced model painted much better, but later runs of models painted a lot more simply. Now here's an example. My creator's model, Lagiacrus and Raytheon. As nice as these authentic models are, they pale in comparison literally to the first run models. Unfortunately, I couldn't borrow first run ones to show you, but if you just do a YouTube search for Lagiacrus and Raytheon reviews, you'll see they have much better color saturation than these, and these actually look washed out in comparison. For another example, we have the star of today's video. This is Seed, the Ankylosaurus from my current favorite company, PNSO. For various reasons, I bought it only a year after it was released. These are the release images. Notice anything different? Well, it looks as if somebody had forgotten to paint him, or he missed quite a few stations at the factory. It's completely washed out, and even though you can still see hints of banding and a paleness of the yellow in the belly, it literally looks like it's been powdered over. I initially thought this was the case where the in-hand model was just really far off until I watched Plastic Prehistorica's review, in which she specifically states her model lives up to the promotional images in every way. I also asked Jay Carriere for a picture of his, received this, and then asked him where he got it from. Amazon. So I ordered another one from Amazon, thinking that perhaps the model from the US and the models from my usual Chinese source would be different. Well, guess what? So, the problem is, this really is a good model with an armor arrangement model after Arbor and Mellon 2017. And it's not likely PNSO would remake another one soon. So the solution for me was, as always, work extra hours to earn some money and then put it towards a repaint. And here is that repaint by the man Jay Carriere. Now Jay repainted my Safari Chinese Dragon, but I'd always hoped to have something dinosaur by this master artist. And while I'd have loved an original color scheme by Jay, this one I really wanted to look the way PNSO intended. And as you can see, Jay has succeeded famously, and I dare say even made it look better than the prototype images. Again, this is a really good sculpt. The overall form is just great. Many models don't really capture the impressive girth that this one does. The species name Magnaventris does mean big belly after all. And when you compare it to the original, you can see how this dullard has brightened considerably. The overall color palette has been lifted simply by restoring vivid yellows that should have been there in the first place. The contrast with the osteoderms and the surrounding skin is dramatically increased, though not unnaturally so. What I especially love is the way that Jay has created the mottling effect of these bands. Now see how organically they segue into the yellow, and they just make the whole thing pop. The scutes are painted properly and the keels are more clearly defined. And you can see how each one is quite unique. For example, look at the bottom cracked appearance here on these scutes. On this, it's completely obscured. But here, you can see it clearly. You don't see any flatness at all. As I said, this PNSO follows closely the 2017 Arbor and Mellon paper. And you can see that here. And if you're mad enough, you can even count the number of scutes and find that it follows almost exactly, except for a couple of extras here on row 7, which we might put down to reasonable variation. The Safari 2018 follows more closely the Carpenter 2004. And so too does my Dance Dinosaurs one. So I'm pleased to have a representation of the Arbor reconstruction. And I'm pleased that Jay's repaint has really framed this very aesthetically. Now I want to focus on this area here, in the hip. I'll look at how many shades you get from the brown bands coming into the tail. But also the different shades of yellow on this one area. I'm a fan of an increasingly darker wash going into the legs, which PNSO usually does, and Jay has restored this. Yeah, the right number of toes too. The tail club, an important feature in the Ankylosaurus, in the original seems to be done in just 1 or 2 washes, with a pink-orange slapped on. Jay's recreated a look that's more akin to the bony structure it is. And see here, you can see the subtle washes even in this one general hue. Needless to say, the tail club is shaped correctly. Sadly, the only letdown, and I mean that literally, is the droop of the tail here. The handle of this bludgeon was composed of fused vertebrae, making it very rigid, and it should be perfectly straight. And while I think aesthetically it makes the club look more impressive and heavy, as if it's causing a kind of droop, to me it actually suggests more an injury, like a fracture. And finally, at the other end is a little special thing that PNSOs imbued this with. This little quizzical twist of the head that gives it so much personality. In this bland one, everything fades into one homogeneous mass. When properly coloured, not only does each capitulum look like real organic tissue, you appreciate more fully the accuracy with which PNSO has sculpted this. Now each capitulum, the supraneurial, the loreal, the lacrimal, the anterior supraorbital, the posterior supraorbital capitululi, and of course the squamosal horn. And from the side, although the squamosal and quadratojugal horns could be bigger, again I think we can allow for individual variability. The smaller ones on the dorsal surface of the head, and the minuscule ones on the side of the face. With a paler yellow on the right. The kind of unevenness in colour you'd expect in a real animal. There's just so much more character and individuality imparted that's obscured by a dullness of colour in the original. I'm absolutely delighted to now have a good arbor ankylosaurus reconstruction looking very close and perhaps even better than what I saw on the prototype images. It just lifts my mood to see, and comparing the two is like watching a 3D movie instead of a flat 2D image. So to finish off, what can I say? Well, if you've ever collected toys, you may have heard of this saying, pay now or pay later. And what this means is you can balk at the price of a toy and put off buying. But later on, because you love it so much, if you do decide to buy, you'll end up paying even more on eBay or to some other reseller. So pay now or pay later. In the case of higher end mid-price models, I'd most definitely say pay now if you can afford it. Because what you pay more later is not the premium paid on the secondary market, but the quality of paint applications compared to earlier runs. Now, some of you have expressed in your comments or PMs to me that you'll hold off buying a model. But accepting financial difficulty, if it's a genus you really like, and you've read or watched a review and are happy with the paint tabs, I suggest get it now, without a guarantee that subsequent runs will be the same and you'll still pay the same later on anyway. It just makes sense to buy now. Of course, the sculpt matters, but once you cast a mold, chances are the sculpts will all still be the same. And what really elevates a model is the paint application. And that's why if you buy a fake Monster Hunter Creators model, usually you'll know they're fake when they're offered without a box. They'll always look great sculpt-wise, because they've probably gotten their hands on the original molds. But while a canvas is nice, you also want the painting. And paint application is where you tend to lose quality. You only need to look at so many beautifully sculpted models from Safari and Collecte to know it's not the sculpt that's the issue, it's the paint apps which makes or breaks it. Now I'll put some links in the description box below so you can see more of Jay's work or contact him for projects in the future. It's been a real privilege to finally get a painted dinosaur by him, and this will belong in a favoured spot on my display shelf. So take care guys, and I'll see you soon with, you guessed it, another review.